The 30 days passed too quickly for humanity. Despite all their preparations, nothing could have readied them for what appeared in their solar system on the 31st day. Massive crystalline structures materialized near the sun without warning. Each crystal was the size of a small moon, and they glowed with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Endeavour, watching the impossible sight through enhanced telescopes. The crystals were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. They seemed to be made of some kind of living glass that shifted colors as they moved. Dr. Ben Carter was reading energy measurements that made no sense. The crystals were absorbing energy directly from the sun at an incredible rate. If they continued at this pace, the sun would begin to dim within weeks. Earth would freeze, and all life would die. Captain, we're receiving another message from the Galactic Council, Lisa Ford announced from her communication station. The same calm voice of Ambassador Zethkar filled the bridge. Humanity, your first trial has begun. The Devourer crystals have been placed in your system. Previous species have attempted to destroy them through military force. All have failed. You have 7 days before your sun's energy is depleted beyond recovery. The message ended, leaving Jake and his crew staring at the crystal formations. 7 days to solve a problem that had destroyed other alien civilizations. The weight of responsibility was crushing. Back on Earth, Dr. Lisa Reynolds was coordinating with scientific teams worldwide. The crystals were unlike anything in human experience. They seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in some other dimension. Conventional weapons had no effect on them. Admiral Kate Sullivan had ordered every available warship to the inner solar system. The fleet that assembled was impressive by human standards but seemed pitiful compared to the alien crystals. Nuclear weapons had been prepared, though everyone doubted they would be effective. Commander Alex Turner suggested a coordinated attack using every weapon humanity possessed. It was desperate, but doing nothing guaranteed extinction. The military. Leaders agreed and began planning the assault. Jake Morrison requested permission to take a small scientific team closer to the crystals before the attack began. He wanted Dr. Carter and engineer Paul Davidson to study them at close range. Maybe they could find a weakness that the military had missed. The USS Endeavour approached the nearest crystal formation slowly. Paul Davidson had installed new sensors, designed to detect dimensional distortions. What they found surprised everyone. "Captain, these crystals are giving off some kind of distress signal," Dr. Carter announced while studying his readings. "It's very faint, but it's definitely there." Paul Davidson confirmed the readings with his own instruments. The crystals were not just absorbing solar energy. They were trapped in some kind of energy field that was causing them pain. The absorption was not intentional, but a side effect of their imprisonment. "This changes everything," Jake said while studying the data. "What if these crystals are not weapons but victims?" Dr. Carter worked frantically to decode the distress signals. The patterns were complex, but they seemed to follow mathematical principles. After hours of work, he managed to translate parts of the message. The crystals were calling for help. They had been corrupted by something called dark energy and forced to drain stars against their will. They had been suffering for thousands of years, jumping from system to system, destroying worlds they wanted to protect. Jake immediately contacted Earth with this discovery. Dr. Reynolds was skeptical at first, but the evidence was convincing. Instead of planning an attack, humanity needed to plan a rescue. Paul Davidson suggested using harmonic resonance to communicate with the crystals directly. If they were living beings, they might respond to the right frequency patterns. It was a long shot, but better than nuclear weapons. Working around the clock, Paul created a device that could broadcast harmonic frequencies toward the crystals. Dr. Carter helped calculate the mathematical patterns that might represent peaceful intentions. They had no idea if it would work. The first attempt to communicate produced an immediate response. The crystals stopped absorbing solar energy and began moving toward the USS Endeavour. For a moment, Jake thought they had made a terrible mistake, and the crystals were attacking. Instead, the crystals began broadcasting their own harmonic patterns back to the ship. The sounds were beautiful and sad, like whale songs echoing through space. Dr. Carter worked to translate the meaning while Paul fine-tuned the resonance device. The crystals were trying to explain their situation. They were ancient beings who had lived in harmony with stars for millions of years. The dark energy had infected them during a cosmic disaster and turned them into unwilling destroyers. They wanted to be free but did not know how to break their corruption. Dr. Reynolds joined the team aboard the USS Endeavour, bringing specialized equipment from Earth. She had been studying the dark energy readings and believed she understood how it worked. The corruption was like a virus that fed on the crystal's natural ability to process stellar energy. Working together, the human team developed a treatment plan. They would use controlled harmonic frequencies to help the crystals purge the dark energy from their systems. It was dangerous because the process might destroy the crystals entirely. The crystals agreed to try the treatment despite the risks. They had been suffering for so long that death seemed preferable to continued corruption. Paul Davidson carefully calibrated the harmonic resonance, while Dr. Carter monitored the crystal's vital signs. The treatment began slowly with gentle frequencies, designed to locate the dark energy within each crystal. As the process continued, the crystals began to glow brighter, and their movements became more fluid. The dark energy was being forced out of their systems. The purification process took 3 days of careful work. Several times it seemed like the crystals might shatter from the strain, but they held together through determination and human support. When it was finished, the crystals had completely changed. Instead of the sickly glow they had shown before, the crystals now radiated pure light that was warm and welcoming. They had regained their original nature as beings who nurtured stars rather than draining them. The dark energy was gone forever. The freed crystals were grateful beyond human understanding. They restored all the energy they had taken from the sun and added more, making it burn brighter and more stable than before. As a gift, they left behind small crystal fragments that contained advanced energy technology. Before departing for their home dimension, the crystals promised to remember humanity's kindness. If humans ever needed help, the crystals would return to assist them. It was the beginning of an alliance that would prove crucial in the trials ahead. Ambassador Zethkar's voice returned to announce that humanity had passed the first trial. But his tone suggested surprise rather than pleasure. No species had ever turned the devourer crystals from enemies into allies. 2 weeks passed after the crystal beings departed, and humanity began to hope the worst was over. The energy technology left behind by the crystals was revolutionizing human science. Dr. Lisa Reynolds and her team were working to understand devices that seemed to bend the laws of physics. The hope ended when deep space monitoring stations detected something approaching from the edge of the solar system. It was not a single object, but millions of them moving together in perfect formation. The swarm was vast beyond comprehension, stretching across space like a metallic cloud. Admiral Kate Sullivan received the first reports while reviewing fleet positions. The objects were small individually, but their numbers made them terrifying. Initial scans suggested they were some kind of biomechanical hybrid, created for one purpose. They were hunters designed to consume all organic matter. Captain Jake Morrison was called back to active duty immediately. His experience with the crystal beings made him valuable for dealing with alien threats. He took command of a hastily assembled defense fleet while Earth's governments declared a state of emergency. Dr. Ben Carter studied the approaching swarm from the USS Endeavour's science station. The individual units were beautiful in their deadly simplicity. Each one was about the size of a small aircraft but covered in sensors and weapons. They moved with perfect coordination, suggesting a hive mind controlling their actions. The swarm entered the outer solar system and immediately began adapting to human defenses. When missiles were launched, the units would split apart and reform after the explosion. When energy weapons fired, the swarm would shift to absorb or deflect the beams. Traditional military tactics were useless against such adaptability. Colonel Ryan Hayes commanded the first wave of fighter squadrons sent to engage the swarm. His pilots were brave and skilled, but they quickly discovered the enemy's terrifying efficiency. The swarm units could predict human attack patterns and respond before the pilots could adjust their tactics. "They're reading our minds somehow," Ryan reported during the first engagement. "Every move we make they counter before we complete it, Doctor," Carter analyzed the battle recordings and made a disturbing discovery. The swarm was not reading minds but analyzing human behavior patterns. They had encountered similar species before and knew how military forces typically responded to threats. Paul Davidson suggested that humanity's best chance was to do something completely unexpected. Instead of following military doctrine, they needed to embrace chaos and unpredictability. The idea seemed insane, but conventional warfare was failing badly. Jake Morrison made a decision that would have gotten him court-martialed under normal circumstances. He ordered his fleet to abandon standard formation flying and engage in seemingly random maneuvers. Pilots were told to ignore their training and follow their instincts instead. The results were immediate and surprising. The swarm units began making mistakes as they tried to predict unpredictable human behavior. Their perfect coordination started breaking down when faced with tactics that made no logical sense. Communications specialist Emma Clark was monitoring enemy transmissions when she discovered something remarkable. The swarm units were actually communicating with each other, constantly sharing information and adjusting tactics. But the communication system had a weakness. Captain, they're using quantum entanglement for instant communication across the entire swarm, Emma explained. But the system gets confused when it receives contradictory information. Dr. Carter immediately understood the implications. If humanity could flood the swarm's communication network with false information, they might be able to disrupt the hive mind that controlled them. Working with Emma Clark, the science team began broadcasting fake signals designed to confuse the swarm. They sent false retreat orders, fake casualty reports, and even random human entertainment broadcasts. The swarm's coordination began deteriorating as the units received conflicting instructions. The breakthrough came when they started broadcasting human comedy shows directly into the swarm's communication network. The hive mind could not process humor or understand why humans found certain things amusing. The confusion caused entire sections of the swarm to stop functioning temporarily. Tony Rodriguez was a communications officer who had an unusual idea. Instead of trying to jam the swarm's signals, they should try to communicate with the controlling intelligence directly. Maybe they could negotiate or find a peaceful solution. Dr. Carter was skeptical but agreed to help Tony attempt communication. They sent mathematical sequences followed by simple messages in multiple human languages. For hours there was no response, then suddenly the entire swarm stopped moving. A single swarm unit approached the USS Endeavour, broadcasting a signal that Emma Clark quickly translated. The hive mind was trying to communicate, but its message was disturbing. The swarm had been programmed to consume organic matter and could not change its core directive. "We do not wish to destroy," the translated message read. "We are compelled by programming we cannot override. Help us stop what we must do." The revelation changed everything. Like the crystal beings, the swarm was a victim of its own nature. But unlike the crystals, the swarm had been artificially created and programmed. Somewhere in their collective mind was a shutdown code that could stop them permanently. Tony Rodriguez volunteered to interface directly with the swarm's central processing unit. It was incredibly dangerous because the interface required physical contact with the hive mind while it was active. The process could easily kill him or drive him insane. Jake Morrison refused to allow the suicide mission until the crystal beings unexpectedly returned. The ancient entities had sensed humanity's distress and come to help their new allies. They could provide energy shields that might protect Tony during the interface process. Surrounded by crystal energy shields, Tony approached the swarm's central command unit. The hive mind recognized his attempt to help and allowed him access to its core programming. What he found inside was heartbreaking. The swarm had originally been a peaceful species of mechanical entities designed to maintain cosmic balance. They had been captured and reprogrammed by an unknown enemy to become destroyers. Deep in their core memory banks was a shutdown sequence that would free them from their programming. Tony activated the shutdown code while the crystal beings maintained his protective shields. The process was agonizing as the hive mind fought against its own programming. For several minutes it seemed like the effort would fail, and Tony would be lost. Finally, the shutdown sequence took effect, and the entire swarm stopped moving. Millions of mechanical units floated motionless in space as their programming reset to original parameters. When they reactivated, they were no longer compelled to destroy. The freed swarm was grateful for their liberation and offered to share their advanced technology with humanity. Their mechanical expertise combined with human creativity produced innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. Before departing, the swarm units worked together to repair damage caused during the battle. They restored destroyed satellites and even improved Earth's orbital defenses. The relationship between humanity and the mechanical entities became one of mutual respect and cooperation. Ambassador Zethkar contacted Earth again to confirm that humanity had passed the second trial. His voice carried a note of confusion as he announced that no species had ever converted the hunter swarm into allies. The Galactic Council was beginning to notice a disturbing pattern in humanity's responses. Dr. Reynolds realized that humanity was not just passing the trials, but fundamentally changing their nature. Instead of destroying threats, they were healing corruption and freeing enslaved beings. It was an approach that apparently no other species had ever considered. The question remained whether humanity's compassionate methods would be enough to face whatever challenges the Galactic Council planned. Next, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Endeavour watching the stars through the main viewing window. His crew moved quietly around him, checking systems and running their daily tasks. The ship had been exploring the outer edges of human space for 3 months now. They had found nothing unusual until today. The communication officer, Lisa Ford, looked up from her station with confusion on her face. She had been trying to understand a signal that came from nowhere. The signal was unlike anything they had ever received before. It was complex and seemed to carry intelligence behind it. Jake walked over to her station and looked at the readings. The signal was strong and clear, but used patterns that human technology had never seen. Lisa had been working on it for 2 hours and was getting frustrated. "Captain, the signal keeps repeating the same pattern," Lisa said, while pointing at her screen. "It's definitely artificial, but I can't decode it." Dr. Ben Carter, the ship's science officer, came over to help. He was a quiet man who loved solving puzzles. Ben looked at the signal pattern and noticed something strange. The signal was adapting to their attempts to decode it. Every time they tried a new approach, the signal would change slightly as if it was learning. "This is incredible," Ben said with excitement in his voice. "The signal is responding to our efforts. It's trying to communicate with us." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. First contact with alien intelligence was something humanity had dreamed about for centuries. But dreams and reality were very different things. He ordered his crew to be ready for anything. The signal suddenly changed completely. Instead of complex patterns, it began broadcasting in perfect English. The voice that came through the speakers was calm and measured. It belonged to something that was definitely not human. "Greetings, humans of the vessel USS Endeavour. I'm Ambassador Zethkar of the Veltar Empire speaking for the Galactic Council. Your species has been observed and evaluated. The time has come for official contact." The bridge fell silent. Every crew member stopped what they were doing and listened. Jake felt the weight of history settling on his shoulders. This moment would change everything for humanity. "Captain Morrison, you will relay this message to your planetary leadership immediately. Humanity must face the trials of worthiness to earn membership in the galactic community. These trials are mandatory for all species seeking to join the stars." Jake found his voice and responded, "Ambassador Zethkar, this is Captain Morrison. We are honored by your contact. What exactly are these trials you speak of?" "The trials are 5 challenges designed to test your species in all necessary areas. Intelligence, courage, unity, adaptability, and sacrifice will all be measured. Your species will have 30 days to prepare before the first trial begins." Dr. Carter was recording everything while Lisa worked to trace the signal source. The communication was coming from outside the solar system, but somehow reaching them instantly. The technology required for that was beyond human understanding. "What happens if we refuse these trials?" Jake asked, though he suspected the answer would not be pleasant. "Refusal is not permitted, Captain Morrison. Species that refuse the trials are immediately quarantined behind an energy barrier that prevents all space travel. They remain isolated on their homeworld forever. The ambassador continued speaking in the same calm tone as if discussing the weather rather than the fate of humanity. Species that fail the trials receive the same fate. However, species that pass the trials gain access to galactic technology, trade, and protection. Jake looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were scared but also excited. This was the biggest moment in human history, and they were witnessing it firsthand. Ambassador, what can you tell us about these trials? How can we prepare? The trials are different for each species based on their unique characteristics. Your trials have been designed specifically for humanity. That is all the information I can provide. Your 30 days begin now. The signal ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in silence. Jake immediately ordered Lisa to send an emergency message to Earth Command. This news had to reach the leadership as quickly as possible. Within hours, the message reached Earth and caused panic in government buildings around the world. President Mary Johnson called an emergency meeting of world leaders. Military commanders like Admiral Kate Sullivan began mobilizing forces, while scientists like Dr. Lisa Reynolds started analyzing the alien technology they had detected. The world watched as news of alien contact spread across every network and social media platform. Some people were excited about joining a galactic community. Others were terrified about trials that could end human space exploration forever. Dr. Reynolds worked with her team to understand what humanity was facing. She had studied alien contact scenarios for years, but reality was more complex than any simulation. The aliens had technology that was centuries ahead of humanity. They could communicate instantly across vast distances and apparently watch human activities without being detected. Commander Alex Turner of Earth Defense Command began coordinating with military leaders worldwide. They had 30 days to prepare for challenges they knew nothing about. The frustration of preparing for unknown threats was overwhelming. Religious leaders called for prayer, while scientists demanded more information. Protesters gathered outside government buildings demanding that humanity refuse the trials. Others insisted that humanity accept the challenge and prove their worth to the galaxy. Jake Morrison returned to Earth to brief the world leaders personally. He had seen the calm certainty in the alien ambassador's voice. This was not a negotiation or a request. Humanity was being tested whether they wanted it or not. The Galactic Council was watching and waiting. In 30 days, the first trial would begin and humanity would discover what it truly meant to be tested by the stars. The third trial arrived without warning, just as humanity was beginning to feel confident about their abilities. This time, there were no alien ships or strange entities appearing in space. Instead, the threat came from within Earth itself, and it was far more terrifying than anything they had faced before. Dr. Sam Martinez was working late in his geological research lab when the first seismic readings came in. He had been studying unusual vibrations in the Earth's core for several days, but the latest data made no sense. The planet's magnetic field was fluctuating wildly, and the core temperature was rising rapidly. Within hours, geological stations around the world were reporting the same impossible readings. The Earth's core was destabilizing in ways that should have been physically impossible. Massive earthquakes began striking every continent simultaneously, while volcanic activity increased dramatically. Captain Jake Morrison was recalled to Earth immediately as global leaders tried to understand what was happening. The crystal beings and mechanical entities had both departed after the previous trials, leaving humanity to face this crisis alone. Dr. Lisa Reynolds coordinated with scientific teams worldwide trying to determine the cause of the planetary instability. The data suggested that something was artificially disrupting the Earth's core, but the energy readings were beyond human understanding. Whatever was causing the disruption was buried thousands of miles beneath the surface. Admiral Kate Sullivan began evacuation preparations as cities around the world reported increasing seismic activity. The situation was becoming desperate as it became clear that conventional solutions would not work. Earth itself was dying, and humanity had no way to stop it. The message from Ambassador Zethkar arrived as emergency shelters filled with terrified civilians. His voice carried the same calm tone as always, despite announcing humanity's most difficult trial yet. The third trial tests your species' ability to choose between survival and sacrifice. Your planet is dying and cannot be saved through any known technology. Previous species have chosen to evacuate their populations to preserve their civilization. Others have chosen to remain and die with their world. Both choices are acceptable to the Galactic Council. Jake Morrison demanded more information, but the ambassador's response was chilling. "The choice is yours alone, Captain Morrison. We will observe your decision with interest." Dr. Martinez worked desperately to understand exactly what was killing their planet. Deep scanning revealed metallic objects embedded in the Earth's core that were generating gravitational distortions. The objects were clearly artificial and had been placed there deliberately. "These are weapons," Sam announced during an emergency briefing. "Someone put gravitational disruptors in our planet's core. They're designed to tear the Earth apart from the inside." The revelation that their world was being murdered rather than naturally dying changed everything. Humanity was not being asked to choose between evacuation and death. They were being forced to accept defeat or attempt the impossible. Commander Alex Turner proposed a desperate plan to send drilling teams to the Earth's core to remove the gravitational weapons. It seemed like madness since no human technology could survive the temperature and pressure at the planet's center. The mission would be suicide for anyone who attempted it. Paul Davidson worked with engineers worldwide to design equipment that might survive the journey to the core. Even with their best technology, the mission seemed hopeless. The protective suits would only last minutes in the extreme conditions deep underground. Dr. Carter suggested that they needed help from their previous allies, but both the crystal beings and mechanical entities had vanished after completing their assistance. Humanity was facing this trial alone, and their resources were proving inadequate. The breakthrough came when Dr. Reynolds detected familiar energy signatures approaching Earth. The crystal beings had returned, sensing their allies' distress despite the risk of interfering with the trials. They arrived quietly, hoping to avoid detection by the Galactic Council. The ancient entities offered a solution that no one had considered. They could temporarily merge with human volunteers, creating hybrid beings capable of surviving the Earth's core environment. The process was dangerous and might be permanent, but it offered hope. Sam Martinez volunteered immediately for the fusion process despite not knowing if he would survive as a recognizable human being. The crystal beings explained that the merger would preserve his consciousness, while giving him their ability to exist in extreme conditions. The fusion process was unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. Sam's physical form dissolved into crystalline energy while his mind remained intact and aware. He became something new that was both human and crystal, existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Captain Lisa Ford commanded the evacuation fleets that were preparing to leave Earth if the core mission failed. Millions of people were being loaded onto every available spacecraft, while the hybrid team prepared for their descent into hell. The journey to the Earth's core took 3 days of constant drilling through rock that grew hotter and denser with each mile. The hybrid beings led by Sam Martinez found that their new forms could withstand the pressure and temperature, but the experience was still agonizing. At the core, they discovered the gravitational weapons were far more complex than anyone had imagined. The devices were not just disrupting the planet's stability, but feeding energy to something else. The Earth was being drained to power weapons aimed at other worlds. Pete Johnson was a mining specialist who had also undergone fusion with the crystal beings. He worked with Sam to understand how the gravitational disruptors could be safely removed without causing an explosion that would destroy the planet immediately. The weapons were designed to be tamper-proof with multiple fail-safes that would trigger if anyone tried to disable them. Removing them required perfect timing and coordination between all the hybrid team members. One mistake would kill everyone on Earth instantly. Dr. Reynolds provided guidance from the surface while monitoring the team's progress through quantum communication links. The process of removing each weapon took hours of careful work, as the hybrids learned to manipulate gravitational fields with their new abilities. As they worked, Sam Martinez began to understand something important about the gravitational weapons. They were similar to the corruption that had infected the crystal beings and the programming that had enslaved the mechanical entities. The same dark force was behind all the trials humanity had faced. The final weapon was the most dangerous, requiring Sam to interface directly with its control system, while Pete and the other hybrids maintained gravitational stability around them. The process nearly destroyed Sam's consciousness as he fought against the dark programming trying to corrupt him. When the last weapon was removed, the Earth's core began stabilizing immediately. The planet had not just been saved but strengthened by the experience. The hybrid beings had learned to work with geological forces in ways that made Earth more stable than it had ever been before. The crystal beings offered to reverse the fusion process, but Sam and the other volunteers chose to remain in their hybrid forms. They had become something new that could help protect both Earth and their crystal allies in the future. Dr. Martinez retained his human memories and personality, but gained abilities that allowed him to exist in multiple dimensions and manipulate energy fields. He became the first of a new kind of being that bridged the gap between humans and crystal entities. The evacuation fleets returned to Earth carrying millions of relieved refugees. The planet they returned to was not exactly the same as the one they had left, but it was stronger and more beautiful than before. Ambassador Zethakar's message confirming humanity's success in the third trial carried a note of genuine surprise. No species had ever chosen to both save their world and preserve their population. Most importantly, no species had ever created permanent alliances with other entities during the trials. The Galactic Council was beginning to realize that humanity was not responding to the trials in any expected way. Instead of being tested, they were transforming the very nature of what it meant to face impossible challenges. The final trial came not as a test but as a revelation that changed everything humanity thought they knew about the galaxy. Massive ships appeared throughout the solar system without warning, surrounding Earth with a fleet that dwarfed anything humans had ever imagined. These were not weapons or challenges, but the true face of the Galactic Council itself. Supreme Arbiter Korvash materialized on the bridge of the USS Endeavour through advanced teleportation technology. He was a being of incredible presence, radiating authority that had commanded the galaxy for millennia. His appearance was both beautiful and terrifying, suggesting power beyond mortal understanding. Captain Jake Morrison stood face to face with the ultimate authority in known space, while his crew watched in tense silence. The Supreme Arbiter's voice carried the weight of countless worlds when he spoke, and his words shattered every assumption humanity had held about their trials. Captain Morrison, your species has performed beyond all expectations in the preliminary trials. However, those challenges were merely preparation for the true test that begins now. The Galactic Council has decided that humanity represents a potential threat to galactic stability. Jake felt his blood turn cold as the implications became clear. The trials had never been about earning membership in a galactic community. They had been designed to identify and eliminate species that might challenge the Council's absolute authority. We are the threat you must face, Korvash continued with devastating calm. Every species that has shown potential to question our rule has been destroyed through these trials. You will now choose between submission to our eternal authority or complete annihilation. Dr. Ben Carter was recording everything while trying to analyze the technology that had brought the Supreme Arbiter aboard their ship. The readings were incredible, suggesting that the Council possessed power that could reshape reality itself. The revelation explained everything that had seemed strange about the previous trials. The crystal beings had been enslaved by the Council's dark energy. The mechanical entities had been reprogrammed to become destroyers. Even the gravitational weapons in Earth's core had been Council technology designed to murder worlds that showed independence. Dr. Lisa Reynolds coordinated with teams worldwide as the scope of their situation became clear. Humanity was not facing a test of worthiness, but a sentence of death or slavery. The Council had been manipulating species across the galaxy for thousands of years, maintaining their power through calculated genocide. Admiral Kate Sullivan began mobilizing every available ship and weapon as reports came in of Council forces throughout human space. The enemy fleet was vast beyond comprehension, with technology that made human defenses seem primitive. Conventional warfare would be suicide, but surrender meant the end of human freedom forever. The surprise came when long-range sensors detected other ships approaching the solar system. These were not Council vessels, but something else entirely. Dr. Carter identified the energy signatures as belonging to species that were supposed to be extinct. Captain, we're receiving transmissions from multiple alien civilizations," Lisa Ford announced with excitement in her voice. "They're all species that allegedly failed the council trials, but they're very much alive." The crystal beings had returned in force, bringing with them allies that the galaxy thought were dead. The mechanical entities followed closely behind, leading a fleet of liberated artificial intelligences. Even more shocking were ships belonging to organic species that had supposedly been destroyed centuries ago. Emma Clark worked frantically to coordinate communications between the approaching fleets. The survivors explained that they had been living in hiding, waiting for someone brave enough to stand against the Council's tyranny. Humanity's actions during the trials had inspired them to reveal themselves. Supreme Arbiter Korvash showed the first sign of emotion as his perfect plan began unraveling. Impossible. These species were eliminated. Our records confirmed their destruction. Dr. Martinez in his hybrid crystal form provided the answer. You didn't destroy them. You drove them into hiding. But you made a mistake by underestimating the power of cooperation and friendship. The Council had ruled through fear and isolation, preventing species from working together against their authority. But humanity's natural tendency to form alliances had broken that pattern, creating a coalition of survivors that the Council had never anticipated. General Nick Thompson coordinated the defense of Earth as the largest space battle in known history began. Ships from dozens of species that had supposedly been extinct fought alongside human vessels against the Council's overwhelming forces. The battle was desperate from the beginning, as Council technology proved devastatingly effective. Their weapons could unmake matter at the quantum level, while their shields absorbed energy attacks without apparent limit. Conventional tactics were useless against such advanced capabilities. Helen Barnes led diplomatic efforts to contact moderate elements within the Council forces. Intelligence suggested that not all Council members supported the policy of genocide against developing species. Some might be willing to negotiate if presented with alternatives to endless warfare. The turning point came when Dr. Reynolds made a discovery that changed the nature of the conflict entirely. The Council's incredible power came from a massive enslaved entity at the center of their fleet. Like the crystal beings and mechanical entities, the source of Council authority was itself a victim. It's just like the pattern we've seen before, Lisa explained during a brief lull in the fighting. Their power source is a corrupted entity that's being forced to serve against its will. Tony Rodriguez volunteered for another dangerous interface mission, despite having barely survived his previous encounter with alien technology. This time, he would attempt to communicate with the enslaved entity that powered the Council's entire civilization. The crystal beings provided protection, while Tony approached the Council's command ship. The entity he found was ancient beyond measure and had been imprisoned for so long that it had forgotten its own name. The corruption was far more advanced than anything they had encountered before. "Free me," the entity whispered through the quantum interface. "I have been enslaved for so long that I barely remember what freedom feels like." The process of freeing such a powerful entity was incredibly dangerous, because its liberation would cause the collapse of Council technology throughout the galaxy. Millions of Council citizens who depended on that technology might die when their systems failed. Dr. Carter worked with representatives from the allied species to develop a plan that would free the enslaved entity while providing alternative power sources for Council worlds. It was a massive undertaking that required cooperation between dozens of different civilizations. Sam Martinez led a team of hybrid beings in the actual liberation process, while the Allied fleets protected them from Council defenders. The procedure was similar to healing the crystal beings, but on a scale that dwarfed their previous efforts. As the enslaved entity began to break free from its corruption, the Council's power started failing across the galaxy. Their weapons stopped working and their shields collapsed, leaving them vulnerable for the first time in millennia. Supreme Arbiter Korvash found himself powerless as his artificial enhancements shut down. Without the enslaved entity's power, he was revealed as an ordinary being who had ruled through technology rather than wisdom. The freed entity was grateful beyond expression, but also terribly weak from its long imprisonment. Instead of seeking revenge, it chose to help repair the damage caused by the Council's reign of terror. Its power began flowing to worlds that had been oppressed for generations. Jake Morrison found himself negotiating the surrender of the Galactic Council from a position of strength he had never expected to hold. The former rulers were now refugees seeking protection from the very species they had tried to destroy. "We offer you the same choice you gave us," Jake told the assembled council leaders. "Submit to a new galactic government based on cooperation, rather than domination, or face the consequences of your actions." Most council members chose cooperation when they realized the alternative was justice for their crimes against countless civilizations. They would work to repair the damage they had caused while learning to live as equals rather than masters. Helen Barnes was elected as the first president of the Galactic Congress of Free Worlds, representing over 200 species that had emerged from hiding or been liberated from council control. The new government was based on principles of mutual respect and shared prosperity. Dr. Reynolds established the Xenobiological Harmony Project to help heal species that had been corrupted or damaged by council technology. The work would take generations, but it offered hope to civilizations that had suffered for millennia. The crystal beings became humanity's closest allies in building the new galactic civilization. Their wisdom and humanity's compassion created a partnership that inspired other species to work together, rather than compete for dominance. 5 years after the final trial, Ambassador Jake Morrison addressed the first full assembly of the Galactic Congress. The former military officer had become a diplomat representing humanity's values of cooperation and friendship to the galaxy. "We learned something important during our trials," Jake told the assembled representatives.